Welcome back, product designers, to the Fusion 360 Beginners course. My name is Avya Jamadagni, and today we'll be focusing on navigating Fusion 360. So we'll be going through the layout of Fusion 360 and the different workspaces. So this is where we ended up last lesson. As you can see, we got rid of the layout grid. If you still have that open, all you need to do is go to grids and snaps and make sure that layout grid is unchecked. Now, let's talk a little bit about the data panel. Now, this may already be open for you, but to open it, all you need to do is click on the top left corner over here, the 9 squares to show the data panel, and that opens this up. So your data panel shows all your projects that you're working on. So especially if you downloaded Fusion 360 recently, you should also have these samples down here. Now they're a great example of how you can go through Fusion 360 and what you can achieve. So let's go ahead and close the data panel right now. To do that, you can either hit the X or hide data panel. Now there's not really a difference between the two. Both of them do the same thing. Let's go ahead and hide the data panel. Now this brings you back to this layout. Now over here is your project bar. This talks mainly about what project you're on. Now with Fusion 360, you can work on multiple projects at the same time, which makes it a lot more efficient compared to other CAD/CAM softwares. This is your view cube. Now your view cube is very useful for literally viewing your product in different ways. For example, if you want a front view, all you need to do is click on the front view and you can manipulate this through the arrows. Or you could just drag the view cube along and that orbits your product around the center origin. And if you want to go back to your normal home view, all you need to click on is this home button over here. And that takes you back to your home view. Now this is your browser section. Your browser section shows all the components, bodies, and sketches of your product. Now this will build up as you start making your product, and to manipulate your components or to turn some bodies into components, this is what you'll be using. The third section I would like to talk about is the comments section. Now this is very, very useful when you're working with your colleagues or your schoolmates and you're working together on Fusion 360 to complete a product. Now you can send your Fusion 360 file to your colleagues and they can give you feedback on it through comments. You can open those comments through this and you can directly edit your product. Now this is the design history. This is a very, very important part of Fusion 360. When you're designing your product, this records every single step you do, and this is very useful for going back a few steps or deleting steps or even manipulating your product by sliding this toolbar over here. Now you'll understand this more as we go along and start making the product we're going to make in this course. And this is your workspace bar. So here you can select your different workspaces. So Fusion 360 has 8 different workspaces, as you can see here. Now the one you'll probably be using most often is the model workspace, which is what we're in right now. Now this is where you create your 2D shapes, you can extrude them, you can play around with different figures, and this is where you most prominently create your product. Now, in Fusion 360 or in product design in general, you're probably not working with just normal regular shapes all the time. Sometimes you need to make unorthodox or irregular shapes. To do that, you can go to the Create Form section and you'll enter the Sculpt environment within Fusion 360. So here is where you can make more complex shapes. You can actually pull shapes apart or in different directions to make more complex figures to your needs. So now let's go ahead and click Finish Form. And that brings you back to your model workspace. Now you can see with your design history down here, it has captured your first step and it says Form 2 unsaved. Now this is how your design history builds up. But for now, let's go ahead and select this thing by clicking it and hitting either backspace or delete on your keyboard to delete it. There you go. Now let's change our workspace. So the next workspace we'll talk about is the patch workspace. Now the patch workspace, from my experience, I found it very useful for playing around with 2D shapes and figures, or stitching together irregular shapes, and then you can apply a thickness to that. Sometimes your patch environment is very useful for creating different textures, or maybe an outer casing for your product, such as say a utility knife. It's very useful for that feature. It is slightly complicated to use, but once you get the hang of it, there's nothing like it. Now the second workspace, the third workspace, or the second workspace that goes along with the patch workspace, is the sheet metal workspace. Now if you're making something with sheet metal, obviously this is the place to go to. So you can create your own sheet metal shape, and you can bend that in different ways using these features. And through that, you can feed it to your milling machine or any manufacturing method that'll help you create your actual shape. Now the fourth workspace is the render workspace. Now this is very, very important in Fusion 360 and gives a professional touch to your final product. Here you can import your product, and you can take different renders of it in different environments as well. You could either do the standard gray background, or you could import an environment such as a landscape, such as a desert, or maybe a hill or a mountain range or something, depending on what your product is, to put your product into its actual landscape, into its actual environment. And renders are very important in presentations, especially if you're presenting to your client, to show them exactly what you've come up with. Now, the fifth workspace I would like to talk about is the animation workspace. If your product has moving parts, this animation workspace helps you animate your product in different ways. So you can understand, so your client or whoever is viewing your presentation will understand exactly how your product works. And here you can take a video of your product. You can even publish it in different formats, which makes it very useful. And then your simulation workspace is also very professional, because once you make your product, you need to test whether the product will actually survive in real-world conditions. This is how you can do that. So you can either do structural buckling. The most popular ones, or the ones I use the most, is static stress, thermal, and structural buckling, because I find these very useful for products in day-to-day life. For chairs and stuff, you need to understand whether it will buckle or not, depending on what weight you apply. Then static stress measures how much stress and how much force it can take over time, and whether it will break or not. And thermal obviously measures how much it can withstand different temperatures. Now the thing about now we can't edit or go into simulation workspace any further. So let's go ahead and click cancel over here. And that should take us back to the render workspace. So let's change our workspace to the manufacture workspace. And this is the CAM part of Fusion 360. Whatever your design is, you can load it into this workspace, and you can actually program different drills or mills, and you can program them to go around your product and to actually make your product. And this can be fed directly into your milling machine or any manufacturing method to help manufacture your product. This is CAM. However, if you're 3D printing your product, the process is much more simpler, and you don't need to do any CAM for that. But we'll go into that in more detail throughout this course. Your final workspace is the drawing workspace. Now, I tend to use drawing from design more than from animation, but you're required to save this first. So we'll go into this later on in this course. Let's go ahead and click cancel now, and that will bring us back to the model workspace. Now you can also enter the drawing workspace by simply right-clicking on a component. Once we make it, I'll show you in the future, but once you have a component, you can right-click on it and you can click from drawing, and that'll open up the drawing workspace as well. So this is this is the basic layout of Fusion 360, and we've also come to the end of our second lesson. Thank you so much for your time. So the third lesson, which is the next lesson, we're actually going to get cracking. So we'll start off with our project. We'll make our project. I'll teach you guys some quick shortcuts that help you create sketches and extrudes. And after that, we'll start making the final product. So thank you so much for your time again, and have a wonderful